Christianity creates great guilt. Buddhism doesn't. The ordinary way of human beings is to overlook one's own faults and to emphasize, magnify others' faults. This is the way of the ego. The ego feels very good when it sees everybody has so many faults and I have none. And the trick is, overlook your faults, magnify others' faults. So certainly everybody looks like a monster and you look like a saint. The Buddha says, reverse the process. If you really want to be transformed, overlook others' faults. That is none of your business. You are nobody. You are not asked to interfere. You have no right, so why bother? But don't overlook your own faults, because they have to be changed, overcome. When the Buddha says, look to your own faults, what you have done or left undone, he does not mean repent if you have done something wrong. He does not mean brag, pat your own back if you have done something good. No. He simply means to look so that you can remember in the future that no wrong should be repeated, so that you can remember in the future that the good should be enlarged, enhanced, and the evil should be reduced, not for repentance, but for remembrance. That is the difference between the Christian attitude and the Buddhist attitude. The Christian remembers them to repent. Hence, Christianity creates great guilt. Buddhism never creates any guilt. It is not for repentance, it is for remembrance. The past is past. It is gone and gone forever. No need to worry about it. Just remember not to repeat the same mistakes again. Be more mindful. Shame. Yes. Guilt, no. There was a famous Olympic swimmer one time who was expected to sweep all of the events he swam in, but he didn't win the first. The commentators then predicted that he would go into a slump and probably lose all the rest as well. But his coach said to them, "You don't know him." And sure enough, he went on to win all the remaining events he swam in. In other words, he didn't let a defeat get him down. He didn't let a mistake get him down. This is an important principle to keep in mind as you think about your precepts. They're basically training rules. That's what Sikkhapada means. Each precept is training rule. Think of being an athlete and how an athlete trains. If you lose a game, does that mean you're going to lose all the games? Well, no. Does it mean you're bad? Not necessarily. You have to reflect. What did you do wrong? Then you learn from that. If you let yourself get eaten up by remorse, that just makes it harder and harder to stick with the precepts. On the one hand, you have the voice that's hounding away at you, saying, see, you made that horrible mistake. You can listen to that voice only for so long, and then a reactive voice will say, I don't care. Things inside you then go back and forth like that. When you don't care, you break the precept again, and then the hounding voice comes back. So as you keep listening to that voice of remorse, and it sounds like the voice of the Dhamma, remind yourself there are things that sound like the Dhamma but are not Dhamma at all. This is one of them. When you make a mistake, the Buddha said to recognize it as a mistake and to make up your mind you're not going to repeat that mistake. Don't go for remorse, because that doesn't accomplish anything. Then you spread lots of goodwill around. Goodwill for yourself to give you the energy to keep on practicing. Goodwill for the people you've wronged, so you'll be motivated not to repeat that mistake. Then tell yourself, this is the best a human being can do. We're fortunate in Buddhism that it was founded by someone who had made mistakes, admitted them, and learned from them. You can imagine what Genesis would be like if, after 7 days, God looked to the world and said, "Whoops, let's start all over again." A world in which beings have to feed off of beings. Even Kurt Vonnegut could think of a better world than that. So the Buddha knew what it's like to make a mistake, but also knew how to learn from one. And an emotion that he never recommends is guilt. He does recommend shame. It's very different. And the shame he recommends is not the kind of shame that says, "You're a horrible person. You should be ashamed of yourself. Don't show your face around anyone." It's more the shame of realizing, okay, I'm a good person, but I slipped. When he taught Rahula to have shame over his unskillful actions, remember, he was a member of the noble warrior caste, talking to his son, trying to imbue him with the attitude of a noble warrior. These people are very proud. Part of a healthy sense of pride is that there are certain actions that you'd be ashamed to do. If you do slip and do them, you say, okay, I've got to be more careful the next time. That's the appropriate way to learn from a mistake. Learning that you've got to be more careful and seeing exactly where you have to be more careful. One of the reasons why we take the precepts is that they give us clear standards to hold by. You hear some people saying that the Buddha was too enlightened to teach hard and fast rules, so we should take them as general recommendations. But no, they're meant to be followed as rules, training rules, because your mind needs to be trained. One of the things you'll find right off the bat is that your mind can be very quick in breaking the precepts, especially if you've lived without the precepts before and suddenly find yourself having to follow them. You can see how quick the mind is to want to break them and not even think that you're breaking anything. You tell yourself, in this situation, I've got to say this. In this situation, I've got to do this. But the precept says no. The precept around speech is the most difficult to hold to because speech is so quick. A thought comes into your head, and sometimes the checkpoints between your brain and your mouth leave all their doors open, so it just slips right through. There was an intention in there that was not in line with the precepts, and you missed it. You let it slip right through. This teaches you that you've got to be more alert. You've got to be more mindful. After all, the things that happen purely in your mind are a lot quicker than that, and they can be pretty devastating. Think of someone on his or her deathbed whose mind starts thinking about this, thinking about that. All sorts of thoughts are swirling through the mind. If you're not really clear about what's going on in the mind, what the mind is saying to itself, then as you leave the body, you can go all kinds of undesirable places. I read a novel one time in which one of the main characters is dying toward the end of the novel. All of a sudden, she fastens on a tree outside the window. Now, if the author were Buddhist, that would be a sign that she's probably going to be reborn as a tree diva, which is not too bad. But then again, she might be born as a bug in the tree. Who knows? The mind is very quick and slithery. It's like mercury. Nowadays, they don't let kids play with mercury, but I remember when I was small, if a thermometer broke, we got to play with the mercury. It was amazing how it could slip around. Well, the mind is more slippery than that. So if you find that the effort required to turn a thought into actual speech is too quick for you to catch, what about the thoughts just on their own? Take this as a warning that you've got to be more careful. You've got to be more alert. This is why the precepts are a good preparation for concentration practice. You need to be mindful, alert, and really take your virtue seriously, but not in a grim sense. The more grim you are about the precepts, the less you'll be likely to stick with them. You want to be serious in the sense that this is something you want to master. Think of it as a game you want to get really good at. Have a sense that it is enjoyable to learn how to get some control over your actions. This is an attitude a lot of us have trouble learning, but it's definitely important. And the Buddha keeps recommending it. He says, you want to bring a sense of well-being, a sense of gladness to the concentration. One of the best ways of doing that is to learn how to stick with the precepts. You get more and more used to thinking in skillful ways, more and more used to seeing the times when you really stick with the precepts where you hadn't before as a victory, and you take joy in that. This is when you learn how to enjoy the training, that you can keep it alive and you're more likely to get quicker and quicker at catching yourself. So if you find that you have that voice of guilt, and the religion on which Western culture is based really advocates guilt as a good spiritual emotion, remember that from the Buddha's point of view, it's not. It's unskillful. It's actually a barrier to the kind of training he wants you to take on. Of course, The people who advocate guilt as a good thing are trying to tell you that you're basically a bad person. This is the difference between shame and guilt. Healthy shame comes from a sense that you're a good person, you have good qualities, and you want to maintain those good qualities as best you can. Guilt basically tells you that you're rotten to the core, and that's not going to help you develop skill at all. It's the kind of emotion that makes you more and more dependent on others. The Buddha's trying to teach you to learn how to depend on yourself, and part of self-reliance is a sense of confidence. Yes, I can do this. I am capable. I've slipped every now and then, but that doesn't mean I can't learn from the slips. When that's the attitude you bring, the training does become a joy, as you're up for the challenges that come, both inside meditation and out. The duties of happiness. Focus on your breath. To see it clearly, you may want to take a couple good, long, deep in and out breaths to notice where you feel the breathing process. Wherever it's most prominent, wherever it's easiest to focus your attention, settle your mind right there. Now allow the breath to become comfortable. Notice that statement. It is a matter of allowing, but it's telling you something you should do. Yet it's also something that, at the same time, should be very comfortable right in the present moment, and you should have a sense of well-being as you do what you can. The Buddha's should are all based around the proposition that what we want, true happiness, is something we shouldn't be embarrassed about. It's something we shouldn't feel ashamed about. It's a noble goal because true happiness is not just hedonistic. It's not selfish. It's something that requires noble qualities in the mind, things like wisdom, compassion, purity, discernment, and integrity. These are all good things. As we stay with the breath and we get it comfortable like this, we're providing a safe space right here in the present moment where all the parts of the mind can come together, and particularly the parts that we tend to identify with, the head and the heart, which often seem to be acting at cross purposes. You think about Freud's analysis of the mind. He said, on the one hand, that there's the ID, which is just your basic raw desire for pleasure. Then there's the superego, which tells you what you should and shouldn't be doing. Then you've got the ego in between, which is negotiating between these two. And the poor ego is faced with the fact that the shoulds of the superego have very little to do with what's making you really happy, so there's always going to be a conflict. But the Buddha's shoulds are different. Freud was raised in a religion where your true happiness was basically shoved off to the side, and lots of the duties placed on you had nothing to do with your happiness. But here, the Buddha is recommending that you take on duties that are directly connected to your genuine well-being and genuine happiness. In other words, there's not necessarily a conflict between your desire for happiness and the shoulds of his path. The conflict that does exist comes from that fact that you have lots of members of your mind who have some pretty strange and narrow ideas of what happiness is. You've got to train them. You've got to show them that the happiness they propose is not the genuine article, but there is a way to find a true happiness. And to whatever extent they can be converted over to that goal, they're welcome to the safe space. Only the totally unreasonable members of the mind have to be pushed out, but you find that the extent to which you identify with those members is based on the fact that you don't really know them well, and you don't really have a good sense of what true happiness can be. This is why an essential part of the safe space here in the present moment is that it be very comfortable. In the beginning, it may not seem like much. You're simply breathing in and breathing out, and it feels fairly ordinary. But if you pay really careful attention to the breath, you can notice, at what point does the in-breath start to feel uncomfortable? Well, stop, and then you can breathe out. At what point does the out-breath feel uncomfortable? Stop. Then, in between the stopping points, does it feel better for the breath to be heavy or light, fast or slow? And how far should it go down in the body? And where is the boundary of the breath? As you get to know the in and out breathing process, you begin to realize that there's an energy flow existing on many levels in the body, and it can fill the whole body. The more you can get all those different types of energy working together with a sense of ease and well-being, then the stronger the pleasure, even a sense of rapture, fullness, refreshment that comes from the breath. So, this does become a really good place to be. And the parts of the mind that want instant happiness can be convinced. Here's a way of experiencing pleasure very directly. The Pali word for pleasure, ease, happiness, well-being, bliss, is all the same word, sukha. Sukha can be experienced on fairly subtle levels or much more blatant levels. What they all have in common is a sense of well-being, that it feels good to be here. So this pleasure makes the more difficult members of your mind more willing to talk, more willing to listen to reason, because the reason here is basically devoted to your well-being. When the Buddha set forth his main teaching, the Four Noble Truths, each of the truths entailed a duty. The duty in each case was designed to lead you to true happiness. In other words, you can take on the duties or not as you want. The Buddha is saying, though, that if you want true happiness, then this is what you have to do. It's not that he designed the duties. These were things that he discovered in his own practice. The first truth, stress or suffering, is something you should comprehend. Particularly, here, we're talking about stress and suffering in the mind. The stress and suffering that the mind inflicts on itself by hanging on to things, by feeding on things that are actually going to lead to more misery, sometimes on subtle levels and sometimes on blatant levels. Our ordinary reaction to that kind of suffering is that we don't want it. You sit down to meditate and you find you're feeling miserable. You want to get up and run away. But if you do that, you're never going to learn anything about those states of mind. You're never going to understand them. To understand them, you have to be able to sit with them. This is why we have the other truths. In other words, you look to see what's arising together with the suffering. The Buddha said it's going to be craving in one form or another, either sensual craving, the idea that you're fascinated with thinking about sensual pleasures, or what's called craving for becoming, in which you want to take on a particular identity in a particular world of experience, or craving for non-becoming, in which you don't like the identity you've got and you want to destroy it. These are the things that accompany your suffering, and these are the things that cause it. We engage in these things out of ignorance, but if you can comprehend the suffering, you begin to see, at the same time, that there is this companion to suffering, the cause. And if you abandon the companion, the suffering goes away. So, this gives you encouragement that you're not just going to be sitting here with suffering all the time. Once you see the cause, you can let it go. To do this, you develop the path, which starts with right view and ends with right concentration, to give you the strength to deal with these things. In other words, you've got this safe space here, and you can ask the right questions. What's causing the suffering? If we focus on the extent to which we're suffering because of things outside, because of things that other people did, we're asking the wrong questions. You have to ask yourself, what am I doing right now that's contributing to this? That's right view. And the concentration, the mindfulness. These are qualities that enable us to stay here with a relative sense of well-being, so that we're not totally sucked into the suffering. We have a safe place to stay. We begin to notice that when there's any kind of craving and we let go of it, there is, at least for the moment, a cessation of suffering. You want to pay attention to that because it gets you more and more inclined to want to let go of other kinds of craving too. As your concentration gets more and more solid, you're able to see even subtler levels of craving that are causing subtler levels of suffering. You let them go as well. So, all these duties work together. They enable you to sit with the suffering and not feel like you're overwhelmed by it. You begin to understand. After all, understanding the suffering is the only way you get past it. And as the Buddha said, to understand these things, there are 5 steps. First, you want to see them arise. Second, you want to see them pass away. Say, for example, you've got a feeling of guilt or remorse about something you've done. It's not the case it's going to be there 24/7. It comes and goes. Even if you're having an hour where you're mainly preoccupied with remorse, it's not continuous. It'll come for a bit, and then it will go, and then come back again, and then it'll go. So you ask yourself, when does it come? When does it go? That allows you to step back from it a bit so that you're not totally sucked in. You're looking at the process. Then, when it comes, you ask yourself, what's coming along with it? In particular, what makes the mind want to grab onto it? The Buddha calls this the allure. Even though there may be mind states that we really don't like, there's a part of us that actually does like them. Remember, the mind is not a single monolithic thing. There are lots of parts, lots of voices, lots of opinions in there. When the sense of guilt comes, part of the mind actually likes it. So you want to see, what is it like? Does it feel like it's going to pay off the debt by inflicting more and more guilt on itself? That's one thing the mind does. The idea is that if we make ourselves suffer enough, then we'll repay whatever debt we feel that we're guilty for. But if you look at that idea, you realize that it doesn't really make any sense. A lot of these parts of the mind have their power because they stay in the shadows. They're able to stay in the shadows because they keep saying, well, I can't be brought into the discussion because I'll be immediately pushed out. But if the discussion isn't held in a skillful way and some of the voices refuse to participate, nothing gets resolved. Here, though, we're creating a safe space where these different voices in the mind, these different members of the heart or the mind, can say their piece. It's interesting. In Buddhism, they use the word citta to mean both heart and mind. They don't divide it into 2 parts between heart and mind because all our mental processes are working for the same purpose, happiness. So when you've got the safe space, you can get the whole committee to sit down around the topic of what kind of happiness is genuine. That's when you can compare the allure of, say, the guilt or the remorse with the drawbacks that you've seen, that at the very least, you weigh yourself down. It's one thing to recognize you've made a mistake, but, as the Buddha said, remorse doesn't go back and change the past. It actually makes it harder to learn from your mistakes in the past so that you don't repeat them in the future, because remorse and guilt usually lead you to not want to think about your mistakes at all. But if you don't think about them, how can you avoid them the next time? There's nothing virtuous about feeling a lot of guilt. You learn to recognize a mistake, you make up your mind not to repeat it, and then the Buddha says, you extend thoughts of goodwill to yourself and all beings. Extend goodwill to all beings so that you don't mistreat them again. Extend goodwill to yourself to remind yourself that, okay, you're doing this for your own well-being. The fact that you've recognized a mistake is not meant to tear you down, it's actually meant to help you. These are some of the dialogues you can have as you see the drawbacks and compare them with the allure. You begin to see that the allure is not worth it, that the drawbacks way outweigh the allure. That's when you develop some dispassion for that particular mind state. When you develop dispassion, that's when you can let it go and be freed from it. Back in the Buddha's time, they felt that fire burned because it was clinging to fuel. This is why they had the image of the nibbana, which literally means the fire's gone out. It goes out because it lets go of the fuel. It's freed because it lets go. It's not that the fuel traps the fire. The fire is trapped by its own holding on. There's a message there that you've been clinging to things that cause you to suffer, and it's not that they're holding you there. You are the one who's holding on to them. If you learn how to gain some dispassion for them, you let go, and then you're freed. And what are you freed into? The Buddha said it's the ultimate happiness. That's at the end of the path, when you've taken care of all the members of the mind. And the mind gets more and more unified in its agreement that this is the way you want to find happiness, based on this path of virtue, concentration, and discernment. With concentration, the big middle ground that gets the mind right here in the present moment with a sense of well-being. This is where the parts of the mind that tell you what you should and shouldn't be doing are telling you that you should work for true happiness, and where all the other parts of the mind learn what true happiness means. Everything comes together. The mind becomes a much more unified mind, with a lot less conflict inside.